All right, good morning YouTube. In today's video, I'm going to be delivering on my long-time promise of the program reconstruction of Wendler's 531. This is a very popular program for a wide variety of reasons because a lot of people have seen very quick and very good progress from it. And the thing is, a lot of programs work. Almost all programs work. If you have good basic exercise selection and a plan of progression that you attack with consistency, it's going to work. It's really no surprise to me that it's going to work. The issue becomes, how long is it going to work? For a lot of people, 531 is not going to be a long-term solution, meaning I don't think that if you did an entire year of 531, that first of all, it would most likely be unlikely that you could do a full year 531. And if you did, then that just means that your body can kind of handle going to close to 90% and above 90% so regularly. So if that's the case, that you could do a full year of 531, you're also probably the kind of person who could do a full year of linear progression, like starting strength 5x5. So when it comes to 531, I'm going to talk about a lot of the issues that I personally see in it, a lot of the things that I would actually fix about this style of training, and then go from there. So let's get started with the actual video. So let's talk about what is 531 and who is Jim Wendler. So first of all, I'm going to start with Jim Wendler. Jim Wendler was a lifter at Westside Barbell. So Westside Barbell being, the greatest powerlifting gym ever to exist, quote unquote, whether that be self-proclaimed or whatnot. But they had a lot of world record powerlifters there. But here's the thing that you have to keep in mind. They were equipped lifters, meaning they had bench shirts, they had squat suits, they had all that other stuff, right? And when it comes to Westside Barbell, there was a great discussion by Steve Shaw, Massive Iron, Alpha Destiny Fast Lifts, and Alexander Bromley on the Massive Iron channel that you could watch. And there's a lot of context as far as like Westside Barbell on that video. But with Jim Wendler, he was a very huge dude. He was like impressively strong and massive. But there's a side of that that's not entirely good for health. So one other thing too is that with Westside Barbell, and because that is equipped lifting, when raw lifting started to become a thing, he wanted to step away from Westside Barbell. He was always a great rider, and he had a way of training that was substantially different from what was going on there. And he took his opportunity to then publish 531. So with the rise of unequipped lifting, he was able to then downsize, become healthier, train other capacities, and then 531 was the method that he used to do that. So 531 is a 3-week wave-loaded program that relies on one hard all-out set. There's a lot of different styles of training that kind of do this, and they do them with a wide variety of different other underlying or other complementary factors or variables that are used. But with 531, it is just one hard set. It's a top set AMRAP, and then you're waving the progression each week. So I will talk about the percentages and all that kind of stuff from there. It is a 4-day upper lower with each day focused on one of the big 5 lifts. So the big 5 being, I don't think a lot of people talk about the big 5 as the big 5 anymore. So squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, barbell row. I do think that the mystique, the glory, the image that they had is no longer there, which is for its own fair and good reasons. So let's talk about what's good. The split. I like the split. If you have watched my Simplify Your Training series, you will know that the split is very similar to this one. Squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press day. Once you start to advance, you can start playing around with that and maybe add, all right, let me add a squat variation to my deadlift day. Let me add a bench variation to my overhead press day. You can start playing around with certain things. The other thing that I like about this, about 531, is the variable intensity. So there is a form of progression and periodization. You're going to move through different thresholds of volume and intensity, because one thing we have to keep in mind is that volume does build strength. You often hear that low volume and low reps build strength. And one thing you have to keep in mind is that with 8 sets of 3 and 3 sets of 8, the volume is equated, right? You're still doing low reps, but the volume is still the same. It's still fairly moderate. So it's on the higher side of things. So to think that volume does not build strength is just incomplete. It's not accurate in the least. So you need to do your tens. You need to do these phases where you are just trying to pack on muscle and stuff like that, right? You can't just rely on low reps all the time and think that that's going to maximize your strength gains. It's not. I promise you, it's not. And another thing that I do like about 531 is that because you are pushing fairly heavy, form and confidence is best built with heavy loads. This is why I still do heavy singles. This is why I prefer doing volume days and intensity days, or primary, secondary days and whatnot, because anyone, like, let's say you can bench upwards 225, you can make 135 look real good. You put 205 on the bar and maybe your form starts to break down, but you never really practice with that load. You never practice your form with that amount of weight. That's where it becomes an issue, and that's where I find the real benefit is of going a bit heavier. So another thing I like about 531 is that it does focus on the basics. Compounds should be the majority of your program, regardless of your goal, in my opinion, okay? So compound movements should make up most of your training. With that being said, there are more than 3 compound lifts. Compound lifts are not just squat, bench, deadlift, or more specifically, they're not just the low bar squat, the competition style bench press, and a sumo or even conventional deadlift. There are a significant amount of other compound lifts that should be the backbone of your training, and their utility can vary depending on where you're at in your training at that time. And another thing that I do like about 531 is that it does start light. So it utilizes something called a training max. So rather than just going based off percentages of your estimated or your current known 1 rep max, it will utilize a training max, which is 90%. So when you do something like 60% of whatever load you're going to use for that day, you're using 60% of 90% of your 1 rep max. And so you're going to be using 60% of your training max. I think that kind of overcomplicates things just a little bit. And percentages, they do vary from each person to person. Like, if you want to get the most out of percentages, one thing you're going to have to do is that you're actually going to have to test percentages on yourself and like fill out a chart, which I will make a video on. But if you do a quick Google search, you can kind of find what I'm talking about. So what's bad? All right. So there's a lot of things that I talked about here, right? Almost everything that's bad about this program comes from what's good about it. So with the exception of the split, there's not enough of a buildup. So when you look here, right? Variable intensity, you go through phases of high volume and higher intensities. You're going through 5s, 3s, and 1s. You're basically doing differing forms of low volume. 5 reps is the middle ground. It's right before you get into low rep stuff. So 5s, they do work, but they're not the end all be all. So if you do a 5x5, that's great. 3x5, that's great. Especially when you add in those AMRAPs and everything like that. But like I said, they're the middle ground of volume and intensity. I do think that you definitely can benefit from phases of 10s and 8s, 12s even, especially because not every single lift fits one kind of programming, volume, and intensity amount. So I'm gonna get that a bit later because that's the last point, but that's something I want to kind of introduce to you. Then the second point is that 3s don't build as much strength as you think. Like I said, if you're going to build your strength with sets of 3, you need to be doing 6 to 8 reps, maybe 5 to 8 reps, 5 to 8 sets, I mean. So there's that, right? Because that allows you to actually get a good volume amount. So look at something like Prilipin's chart. That's great for strength. It kind of shows you like what you're going to be doing from there, right? And here's another thing. 1s, singles, they do not build strength. Me using singles in my training, me trying to add load on those singles in my training, is more so an indicator that I'm getting stronger, but it's not where I'm actually trying to build any new strength. So singles help you stay specific. They keep you primed for heavy loads. They keep your form primed for when the weight will have an effect on your form, but it doesn't build anything new. Every new amount of strength that you build will come from your rep work. So that's very important to understand. Going to heavy singles too frequently is another thing that I'm not really the biggest fan of. You're going to heavy singles or, heavy above 90%, even though it is a training max. So maybe it's closer to 80, 85%. But even then, to an extent, just trying to redline it so close to 100% of your current strength in basically 4 weeks is just a bit much. So that means like every month, every single month, you're going to be redlining it a significant amount. You're not really spending that much time in building phases. So if you watch my previous video, I said how 9, 10, or 12 weeks are the minimum for like certain like training programs and blocks and stuff. So you should be like a bit, so that's like a full block of training, right? So then when it comes to waves and stuff like that, that should be that 3 to 4. So in this one, you're doing a whole block in 4 weeks. You have a 1 week long volume block, a 1 week long like transmutation block, if you want to be all scientifical and big brain about it, meaning you're just like going from like higher reps to more moderate to then low reps to be more specific for strength. And then you finally have that one, your singles, where you kind of like realize or materialize your new strength. And like I said, that's just not really how it's going to go. And the reason why it's not going to work all that well for you is because 5-3-1 is more like a peaking program. If you are familiar with linear periodization, block periodization, or even undulating, when it starts to get closer to the end where you're supposed to be at a specific point in time, when it comes to undulating, it's the averages that become more, it's the averages that are linear over time. So like on average, you're doing more work throughout the session during this piece of time, but that's a different conversation. And then here's another issue with 5-3-1. Only one hard set on a program that is pretty low volume is not going to be the best recipe for size or strength. So beginners, this will work fine because anything works for beginners. That's something that needs to be stated. Another thing that needs to be talked about is the fact that if you are just gifted, if your body is, very resilient, you're pretty strong, and you can just rely on linear progression for a long ass time, which is much, and like honestly, I feel like a long ass time might be 3 months. I don't know. I'm not particularly talented when it comes to strength and size. I just kind of kept going. So I'm not necessarily all that informed on what it's like to be talented or gifted. But anyway, someone who has never done a peaking program is going to benefit from this as well. So let's say you did like a very high volume program prior to this. Maybe you did a more specific bodybuilding style program where you're doing a lot of sets of 10s, a lot of sets of 8 to 12 and everything like that. And then all of a sudden you decide, you know what? I want to do strength, and I'll choose 5-3-1. And then you make these great ass gains because you're pretty well rounded as a result of your previous training. You're gonna get those results from 5-3-1 because you just peaked. That's it. And then another thing that I want to point out is the possibility. This is like that a training max could potentially make your training even less efficacious, meaning because you're just lifting so light and you're only going to failure on one set, that could potentially make things a bit harder to progress in size and strength in the long term. I am of the opinion that people do need to learn how to push safely. They need to learn how to beat the books safely, and they need to learn how to handle heavy loads. Giggity. So there's that. It is not made specifically for size, strength, or athleticism. So when it comes to 5-3-1, he had it made, at least to my understanding and what I've been told and like what I've seen in my research, is that he wanted to have something that was simple, accessible for most people, and allows you to do other things. Allows you to run, allows you to hike, allows you to live your life, do yoga, do whatever else you want in your life, like have a life really outside the gym. That's the benefit to 5-3-1. It's not specifically made for top level strength athletes, and it's not made for top level bodybuilders. I don't think there's any top level strength or bodybuilder who's using 5-3-1. And you can make the argument, they do AMRAP sets on the last set. It's like, yeah, that's a key feature of 5-3-1, but that is not 5-3-1. 5-3-1 does not have a trademark on certain principles or practices. So there's that. Not all basic compounds lift, or not all basic compound lifts fit one kind of programming, volume, and intensity and frequency and everything like that. So the bench press, for example, I personally believe that when it comes to the bench press, you should be just trying to get as much volume into that movement as possible, because you just want to get the muscles involved as big as possible as they can be. And that strategy is going to work very, very well. Now, when it comes to squat and deadlift, however, the issue becomes the fact that you're loading your spine so much and with such heavy loads, because those are our strongest muscle groups. So we're putting a lot of pressure on our body. So we're going to have to use other variations that are self-limiting to allow us to get more volume and stuff like that. And going higher frequency on a deadlift is not going to work out all that well for some people. For others, it's going to work great depending on their leverages. And I do think that while we kind of make a boogeyman out of the deadlift for its stimulus to fatigue ratio, there's definitely an argument to be made that our bodies are not, you know, fragile flowers that we just need to, you know, keep in a box or whatever. I don't garden, but there's that. Not all basic compound lifts fit the same thing. 5x5, because it's just so middle ground, can be applied to a lot of things, but that means you're just never experimenting with the upper and lower reaches of what's good for that lift. So there's that. So here are some important concepts that I want to have you keep in mind while I explain ways that I would improve 5-3-1. First, strength is not built with low volume. Low volume is not the same as doing low reps. Low reps, 1 to 5 reps, 1 to 6 reps maybe, for multiple sets is going to be great. So let's say you do 4 to 6 sets for 4 to 6 reps, right? That's a pretty good range for building strength. It's very specific. You're handling loads that are specific for strength. You know, you're probably in that 70 to 80, 85% kind of going thing. So there's that. 5 to 8 sets of 1 to 3 reps is not the same as doing a 3x3 or a 3x5. That I have to point out. Another thing that I need to point out is that strength is built with reps and volume. One thing I want to talk about here is this. If you don't know what to do in the gym, just bodybuild. There's no downside to bodybuilding. Off-season training is actually like one of the best things that, or is one of the main ways that people who are at those top levels of strength have relied on. They can't be highly specific year-round, and neither should you. So if you don't know what to do, if you hit a plateau, if you are not getting any stronger, bodybuild. Focus on your form, focus on your rep quality, focus on getting a good amount of reps, focus on like actually feeling the muscles you're trying to do and not just like maximize load. Doing all of those things, when you start focusing on strength again, you'll find that your strength is in a lot better of a place. Another thing I want to point out is the fact that natural lifters do not have the luxury of picking size or strength. Either or, meaning like you either get big or you either get strong, is a fallacy. I promise you that that's not going to be the case. Even for people who, you know, let's say they stopped using the barbell, they're still trying to progressively overload on other movements and other exercises that they find will lead them to have bigger muscles. And they do so by adding load over time, doing more reps over time, doing more sets over time, like giving their body a heavier or more voluminous stimulus over time, progressively overloading, basically, right? So there's that. Size and strength are not one-to-one, and optimal training for size and strength are not the same. But a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. And if you make a muscle stronger without compensatory strategies like an excessive arch, shortening the range of motion, it will get bigger, and then like they just feed into one another. Another thing I want to point out here is that you do not need high frequency right away. If you have heard that, oh, high frequency is the best way to go for size or strength, that's not necessarily the case. You should maximize your ability to get, for strength at least, to get the most out of one time a week and then add another session later down the line. I wonder if you can hear my dog. He's like going crazy right now. But anyway, so here's what I would change. When it comes to 5-3-1, given that as a 4-week cycle, and then you just repeat that cycle like over and over again, I would lengthen that. I would make your fives week not be 2 to 3 weeks instead. Your 3s week be 2 to 3 weeks instead of 3s. Your 1s week, something like where you kind of go to a different single each week and then you AMRAP on that last week. So that way now it becomes a 9-week training block. It now becomes a 9-week program. So there's that. I would also have you start at higher volumes. This, if you take that second one by itself, start at higher volumes, this no longer becomes 5-3-1. It starts to become something more like Juggernaut. I would also include more bodybuilding work. There are so many different versions of 5-3-1. The triumvirate, boring but big, those are the two that I'm going to be going over in this video. But I know that there's a lot of different versions of 5-3-1, and they all suffer from the same thing. Just because there's so many, and like here's the thing. A lot of people say like, oh, what about this version of 5-3-1? Oh, what about this version of 5-3-1 where it does this, where it does this? It's like, shut up. Like, just because there's so many different versions of 5-3-1 with their own strengths and weaknesses, what does that say about the system itself when it requires that many different variations to handle its own shortcomings? It usually means that it's like a system so horrible, or not necessarily horrible because I'm trying to be polite here, but it's just a system that is so incomplete that it constantly has to reinvent itself to stay even somewhat relevant when it's fighting against its own very nature. So there's that. I say that a lot right now. Anyway, let's look at the triumvirate. So this is what you can get off of T Nation. So you have the original version where you have the standing overhead press, the deadlift, the barbell bench press, and the squat. I left the squat day almost untouched for the reasons I'm going to get to. So with my modified version of this variation of 5-3-1, and this variation of 5-3-1 is that on the main lift, you do the progression that I outlined way in the beginning, 5-3-1, 1 week at 5s, 1 week at 3s, 1 week at 5-3-1, and then you have a deload week 4. I wanted to keep to doing 3 exercises because I think that the reason why this was made was because it's for a busy person's schedule. And here are the changes that I made. First, while I understand why you would put them right after the other, so let's say you do your heavy work and then you do your volume work right after, which I'm not totally against. Like, for example, with the deadlift, right? In my training, what I do is I go to a heavy single on my deadlift, and then I do my heavy rep work with a variation, like a deficit stiff leg or a Romanian deadlift. So that's fine. The reason why I didn't do that here, though, is because I wanted you to get open to the idea of putting in a different exercise in between your movements, so that way your body or that part of your body has an opportunity to rest. So an example would be on the original bench press day, you do barbell bench, then you do dumbbell bench, then you do dumbbell row to finish off the exercise or finish off the day. What I would do instead is that you would start off with your barbell bench, then you would row, so that way your chest musculature has a chance to rest, and then you would do dumbbell bench. With the accessories on this version of 5-3-1, it's literally all just 5 sets of 10 to 15 reps. That's it. He just applies that to everything. My issue with this is that when you apply something like that to everything, it's like a high enough amount of volume where it will work because it's just a high enough amount of volume. Where it's just like it's like a shotgun, like you're sure to hit something if you just point at it. Like there's that. I need to cut out on that. Sorry, but anyway. Another change I made was on the overhead press day. So here you have standing OHP, then your dips, then your chin-ups. Like I said, I would move the chin-ups here. The deadlift day, I took out the good morning. I understand why the good morning is there, and I'm not saying that good morning is a bad exercise. The reason why I took it out is because if you are, a bit closer onto the novice side, I do think that doing the Romanian deadlift is going to be a bit better for you practicing your hip hinge, practicing your deadlift volume, because most programs as a novice, as a beginner, just don't have enough deadlift volume, or doing back extensions, because I just think a back extension is just a better exercise for your posterior chain. That's just me. Good mornings are a great exercise. I'm currently doing them in my current programming, and they are wonderful. I'm just not entirely sure that they're the best in this scenario. Then with hanging leg raises, I didn't change that because, this is as close to antagonistic as you will get when it comes to like a deadlift. Because squats, there's a lot of similarities between them. But yeah, there's that. I need to be mindful of that. Shoot. Anyway, we do this in one take. I'm not starting over just because I keep saying the same thing. So when I made this, like I said, I tried sticking to 3 exercises, but I do not condone this. The squat day should have back work. I would put a lat pull down after squats, then go over to the leg press, and then do leg curls. You should have side and rear delt isolation exercises. Compound lifts are pretty trash at hitting those muscles. So you should have side and rear delt isolation work. You also should have bicep and tricep work. Long head of the triceps don't really get hit by the overhead press or the bench press. If you want to keep your elbows healthy, strong biceps and triceps are a benefit strong biceps and triceps provide that benefit. And then another thing about this is that when you do have a program that has nothing but basic compound lifts, you can trick yourself into thinking that it's an okay program. You are hitting all your bases. You're hitting all your muscle groups. You're doing you're doing all that is necessary, right? I'm not going to argue that. It looks like it's okay, but it's not. Minimalist programs create injured lifters. I can't reiterate that enough. Minimalist programs create injured lifters, or they just create weak lifters, one or the other. And at that point, the only thing injured is your ego. So here's the other most common variation, and that is boring but big. So with boring but big, you have day 1, your press, then your deadlift, then your bench, then your squat. So same thing as last time. You have your 5-3-1 progression on your main lift, then you do 5 sets of 10 and 5 sets on whatever other work that he has you do. So same thing. It's very similar to the triumvirate, just 2-3 exercises or something of that nature. The example 2 is kind of something where I talked about in the previous version, where like I said, you could split apart your rep work on the deadlift and your squat onto each of their own days. So that way on one day you have a rep work deadlift variation. So maybe your Romanian deadlift for 5 sets of 10, and then, or even just a standard deadlift, 5 sets of 10 on your squat day. And then you do like your squat variation, 5 sets of 10 on your deadlift day. So that way you now have it twice a week. That could be good for developing your technique and whatnot, but it could also just tire you out more because now you're making those 2 days harder than they would have been otherwise. So you have to be cognizant and aware of that. But this is boring but big in a nutshell. It is your 5-3-1, which is 3 sets. Then you do 10 sets of additional work on 2 other exercises. When I modified it, right, what I would recommend to you is that you add in 2 more exercises for 3 sets, and then another 2 exercises for 2 sets. So you do your 5-3-1 with the main lift. You do some back work for 3 sets, right? Or some additional volume work on the deadlift, for example, for 3 sets, 6 to 10, 8 to 12, something of that nature. Then leg press, same thing. Maybe 8 to 12 on the leg press, 8 to 15 even, going all across these movements, because these are other big hitters where like good amounts of volume will translate over to bigger muscles and then bigger numbers on your main lift. And then you just have these 2 exercises for a burn. You have leg curls or leg extensions where you're just going for 2 sets of 10, 12 to 20, maybe even 30 plus reps on these exercises where you're just trying to burn out the additional muscles or smaller muscle groups that are getting neglected by everything here. Because you're only doing 2 sets, you can go a bit closer to failure. You do a bit more reps and everything of that nature. With this, you're getting a significantly more amount of work done, but with the same exact volume. You have 3 sets here, and rather than just doing 2 exercises for 5 sets of 10, why not do 4 exercises, 2 of which are at 3 sets, 2 of which are at 2 sets. So now you have exercises that will help build you muscle, help get you more volume, and then some other muscles where you can like do a bit more super high volume work. So, going into that 12, 15, 20, 30-ish range. I think that's a lot better already. You're hitting more of your muscles, and this should take you about the same amount of time, but it should also help you recover faster. These movements are not as taxing. 5 sets of squats is pretty taxing. So on the boring but big, like look, you have like on the first one, right? Squat and then squat again for 5 sets of 10 reps. What's easier, that or doing some leg press and leg extensions? This one will be a lot easier for you to recover from long term, and it's also going to round out a lot more weaknesses, and you get to keep this a bit heavier and then like everything else. So it starts to introduce elements of fatigue management. It starts to cover up some weaknesses. It starts to not leave as many holes in your training. So if you are going to do 5-3-1, if you're going to do something like the boring but big program, I would do this. If you go to the gym and you get scared about doing more than 3 exercises, I would advise you to get over that. But let's say you're training for other reasons. Maybe you're not trying to get as big and as strong as possible. You're just trying to be fit. All right, cool. Then you're good to an extent. At that point, like you could argue that, well, if that's the case, then you don't even need to be doing squat, bench, deadlift. Arguments to be made there. But if you are training for other reasons, then yeah, sure, maybe like doing all this time for this extra bodybuilding work might not be the best for you. But then I would also argue that maybe 5-3-1 is not the best for you either. So be aware of that. Another thing I want to talk about is then the progression scheme. So the original progression is this. Week 1, you're going to do 3 sets of 5, right? And you're going to do an AMRAP on this last set, right? So 75%. So you do 65% for 5, 70% for 5, and then you do an AMRAP on 75%. And these are all operating on a training max. So you could kind of take 10% off all of this. Then you do, at least I think that's how the math works. I'm not that good at math, so I want to put that in there before I like make myself even look more stupid. But anyway, then on the week 2, you do a set of 3 with 70%, a set of 3 with 80%, and then you do an AMRAP with 90% of your training max, of course. So that makes things a bit better. Then you do a set of 5 with 75%. a set of 3 with 85%, and then as many reps as possible with 95% of your 1 rep max, or 95% of your training max. And then you deload and you do like another wave again. No AMRAP, at least I don't think so, on that one. Here's how I'd modify it. Like I said, you would extend out that training. On week 1, you're going to do 3 sets of 5 with 70%. And on that last set, you hit an AMRAP. Then next week, you do 3 sets of 5 at 72%. So this should be 10 pounds heavier. And then you do another AMRAP on that set. You do it for a third week, 74%, 3 sets of 5, AMRAP. So on that last week, you should be closing in a bit higher on the RPE, a bit higher on everything like that. And then with your AMRAP, you're pushing a bit closer to failure. And then you drop down into the 3s next time. Then you do 80%, 3 sets of 3 at 80%, 3 sets, and then with an AMRAP, and then everything like that. So where it becomes interesting is on weeks 7 and 9. On week 7, you'll do as many reps as possible. Like, I mean, it's kind of almost useless to write this out. I mean, if anything, the 1, 3, and 5 are just your minimum thresholds. Like, you should be able to hit at least these numbers, but you should be aiming for more. So on week 1, you do 86% for as many reps as possible. You do a drop set. I would recommend about 7.5, 8% drop set. Then you do the same, maybe even a bit like more or a bit less, because you're not trying to replicate the same number of reps that you did on the first set. So you can even do just take off 10 to 20 pounds and then, or another 3 to 5%, and then just go from there. And then you do a drop set hitting at least 3 reps. Then you do another drop set hitting at least 5 reps. And then you just build up on that first top set for these weeks. And then you deload week 10, or you just start back again at right here. So that's the first modified progression that I would recommend. Do I think that this is like perfect? No, but hey, it allows you to keep the title of 5-3-1, because you're doing 5s for 3 weeks, 3s for another 3 weeks, and then you're trying to hit, AMRAPs here. So 1 all-out hard set there. Another modified progression, I really suck at numbering things. This is like progression number 2, but I put 3, is 2 to 3 weeks, and you increase the range. And this is essentially Juggernaut, which is a more effective version of 5-3-1 in my opinion, or a more effective use of last set AMRAPs, because there are a bit more nuances and a bit more volume accumulation time and everything like that. So 2 to 3 weeks, so very similar to this. You can even do 2 weeks, so 2 weeks at 10, 2 weeks at 8, 2 weeks at 5, 2 weeks at 3, then 1, and that gives you a 10-week training cycle. Or you can do 3 weeks, which extends that out even further. Last set AMRAPs still apply, and then I would still do that for accessories, that same thing that I mentioned from Boring But Big, and then adding volume when necessary. You can bump everything up to 3 sets, and then maybe some exercises are more or less, and you kind of start from there. When it comes to volume, always start on the low end. You can always add volume later. Don't assume that you can just recover indefinitely from any amount of volume that you put in. Spend a specific amount of time at a certain threshold, at a certain amount of volume, and then when it ceases to work for you, add volume. If you start with the highest amount of volume possible, if you start with the highest amount of weight possible, if you are already cranked up to 6 times a week training, where do you go from there? The only way to go is to start backward, or only place to go is backwards. So, and then build back up. So why not just, when you're starting out, don't get enticed into high frequency, high volume, high intensity, and just build up over time. Add in those things when necessary, and not when you think it's appropriate, just because your favorite lifter or your favorite YouTuber says it's really, really good. It's really, really good when you apply it at the right time. So here's some things about future proofing with even my modified version, and especially with the one outlined by Jim Wendler. The volume may not be enough, right? If you are doing something like this, right? Eventually the volume just won't be enough. And you will eventually need to have a day in the training where you're keeping volume relatively high and you're never losing sight of volume, right? The main weakness of linear periodization, when you don't keep in like another day to kind of work on other capacities where the muscles are being challenged, where the muscles are growing and everything like that, is that you lose touch with volume and then you get actually weaker. You become detrained at that threshold. And that's not something I think is worth it. And I think that's something that actually like causes you to be more prone to injury. So there's something to be said there. Now, if you have any comments upon that and anything that I missed there, please let me know, because I also want to be able to like learn from anything any of you have to say in the comments, and especially if there's any of my peers or other people, or more appropriately, people that I look up to who have something that I can learn from and something that I've missed. So another thing that you have to be mindful of is that hard efforts do become disproportionately taxing and you need to spend more time in developmental phases. This is why base building is so important. This is why off seasons are so important. This is why exercise variations are so important, because these exercise variations are in a way self-limiting, but they have great carryover to the main movements. They build more muscle than the main movements because they are more challenging on the muscle. They might take it through an extended range of motion, thus allowing more time under tension. And then you're just getting a bigger muscle that when you start training more specifically, increases your winter max. And I already kind of talked about why you should have a strength day and a volume day, a intensity day, volume day, strength day, size day, a primary day, secondary day, and things of that nature. I just think that over time, that's just going to be a reality of your programming. Different coaches, different methods call it different things, but at the end of the day, they exist, and they exist there for a good reason. So that's that. So let's talk about some closing thoughts, and then I'll let you guys go. 531 is a program with a variety of good elements that it executes poorly on. Going through different phases of volume and intensity, that's a good idea, for strength especially. But it does it so poorly because they're just so close together. It's just 5s, 3s, and 1s. You're not really getting anything out of developmental phases, which is about that 8 to 12. And then you're not really getting anything in the strength realm, which is more that 4 to 6. Like that's strength size, kind of strength endurance, kind of like strength relevant hypertrophy, whatever it is you want to call it. I don't know. And then eventually that peaking area where it's like 1 to 3, you know, there's that. For strength, periodizing your training is super important. It might not be super necessary for hypertrophy. If you manage fatigue correctly, you might not even need to deload because you're doing things properly. You know, your exercise selection is on point, your volume, intensity, like where you go to failure and everything like that might be on point. So that way the necessity of a deload just isn't substantiated. I think that's a bit of a niche and not the most common like event, but it's just something that does exist out there. That's something I want to point out. If your goal is maximum hypertrophy, I do not think 531 is a good program for you. I don't think it is. If your goal is max strength, I don't think it is either. There is no high level, natural, or competitive enhanced lifter that I can think of who utilizes 531 as their own program. They might have different variables or principles, but like I said, those principles are not trademarked by 531. Juggernaut uses last set AMRAPs. There's a great video by Steve Shaw, Massive Iron, who has outlined 4 kinds of progressive overload that he likes to use, and last set AMRAPs are involved in there. So methods are many, practices are many, but principles are few. The principle is back down sets, waving and periodizing are all great ways to train, but I don't think that 531 executes on them exceedingly well. So 531 is great for someone who is busy, doesn't want to do too many things in the gym. Go in, get out. There might be some better ones out there, like even the program put out by Basement Bodybuilding, where it's just, you know, like his beginner program. Even that one's like going to be good for a lot of people who are busy and just want to like get in there, get out, but still make gains. And when you implement any of my changes, it ceases to become 531, like quite honestly. Or eventually you're going to get to a point where it needs to cease being 531. And it will need to become something more like the 853s of fast lifts or something more approximating Juggernaut. So if you are doing 531, these are some things that I would implore you to think about when you're trying to make it work better for you. Take my boring but big template. I think that is like, that should be like this right here. This is where it kind of starts, right? If you want to do 531, at least run it like this. And then eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to need to, like, you're going to do this version of Boring But Big with this progression right here. And then eventually you're going to get to a point where, like, okay, it stops working. Let me start adding a bit more volume. Let me start going from 10, 8, 5s, and 3s and go from there, right? But if you're running 5-3-1 and you want to run 5-3-1 as it is right now, run it like that. So that's my answer to 5-3-1 being reconstructed. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Message me on Instagram. If you would like to support the channel and support my work and would like to support my ability to make more of these kinds of videos, I would highly recommend that you subscribe on Patreon, where I will be releasing my push-pull legs program this coming week. So yeah, if you would like to support the channel, you can do so by either buying merch, buying coaching, or supporting me on Patreon. I highly appreciate everything that you do supporting the channel, whether it be liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing my videos. Doesn't matter what it is. If you find my information helpful, even that in itself is supporting the channel. So if you feel like or if you don't want to give anything monetarily, giving me your time is just as valid and just as much of a good support as any other. So thank you so much. Have a great day.